grad program in visual studies. My work is on these two walls, this table, and on this back wall in the second room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of give a little background information as to where the work is coming from, and then walk through all 4 projects that are here and how they're related. So when I lived in Columbus, Ohio, I lived in what's known as a punk house, a term that I personally just don't like. But what it was a communal living situation that provided a space for bands to play in the basement. So touring bands and local bands would come to our house, we'd have people over, they'd play in the basement. And in the time that I lived at the house, you know, almost 400 bands played while I was there. There was a large turnover of people living there, and it became this experience that was really strange and sort of disconnecting. I felt really disconnected from people I interacted with outside of the house and outside of the community, because I was so immersed in doing this thing all the time that was constant and the same. So when I moved away from Columbus and moved out of the house, I found myself in a whole new environment. I was in an academic institution that was very arts-oriented but not culture-oriented, which sounds like they should be tied together, but they're not necessarily. And so interacting with these new people and having these new experiences, the person that I was and the way that I had lived my life had nothing to do with them, and I was having a really hard time. I decided to begin making work that contextualized myself in their lives. Instead of making work about myself, I was making work about what I was in relation to them. So the first project I started was this series of photos on the table here. It's called 2020. It's a little bit of a reference to hindsight and 2020 with Barbara Walters. And so what this project is I mailed 20 disposable cameras to 20 people that were members of the community or roommates in the house, and I asked them to document their lives. And in doing that, it was an attempt to produce a rapid archive or a rapid dialogue of lifestyle. So the photos are sort of scattered. You get things that are sort of like vacation-y and really general, and you get things that are sort of posed and party-oriented. And the whole series resulted in about 400 photos, and they paint this picture of variety. We have this real push between care and uncare, a lot of drinking, some smoking, some drugs, and then some really happy moments, vacations, group photos, birthdays, etc. This project was inspired by people like Nan Golden. She was a photographer that chronicled sort of the late 80s drug scene in New York, revolving around her friends. And also Danny Ryan, who was a 60s through current photographer, but his body of work called Bike Riders, which was, he joined a rebel motorcycle gang and documented their lives. But in getting these photos back, the one thing that I realized is that every single one of them is performative in a way. You're seeing something authentic happening, you're seeing people act in a way that's natural to them, but if you're not familiar with them or what they're doing, it's a performance, it seems like a joke. And so, moving on from there, I decided to work on this series of posters, which is called The Tenants. And what these are, or what they're meant to serve as, are the rules of performance, like a stage play or being in a band. There are certain things that you're required to do. You have lines, you have guitar parts, you have lyrics to sing. And that informs the performance and the activity. So that's what these posters are. So they're meant to describe the photos, but they're also meant to describe the sort of duality of care and uncare in the community. Some of these things, a lot of these things, aren't necessarily positive or something that you would choose to take on in your own life day to day. But in that environment, they were something that happened naturally, people did it. And I'm pushing with that care and uncare through the printing. These are screen prints as well, just like Sheen's prints were, but they're not printed perfectly, and I let the sort of process take over, and I let the prints ruin themselves. So you get things that end up looking dirty and uneven, or fairly clean and constant. And also, I chose to use cardboard as a framing mechanism because cardboard itself is a material that's defined by care and uncare. You use cardboard to move your possessions when you move. you get packages in cardboard, you wrap things in cardboard. But as soon as that purpose is served, you dispose of the cardboard and get rid of it. It doesn't matter. So they're meant to be heralding and deliver an idea or a point, but to also recognize that in themselves and in itself, this community has a disposability built in. And then the next series of work that I worked on are these 3 large panels here and these 3 large panels in the other room. So I worked on these 2 projects to describe the community and begin to explain how I acted and what I did. But then I wanted to sort of look at it from the opposite side. How is someone who's sitting at home, looking at my website, going to enter my work? And I sort of realized the way they're going to do that is through Google or Wikipedia and looking up bands and punk houses and punk music. But there's a real problem in Wikipedia, and it's that it's socially mediated, but that's also a relationship that was, or a fact that's related to the space. It was socially mediated in itself also. So I thought that, I began to think of Wikipedia as this perfect representation of culture, both subculture and mass culture, in that anyone can interact with it, anyone can change it if they want to, and you can also sit there and sort of, like, I don't know, I think of like K-holing or something, but like, you can sit there and click on links and sort of like wiki-hole and go through the background of everything until you get to the most basic version of something. So in these 3 panels I have the 3 things that always came up in talking about my work. It's punk subculture, intentional communities, and punk house. But as the prints go back in space, they're cut out layer by layer. They jump back in time to their relations. So intentional community goes to commune, goes to host family, and nuclear family. So it's sort of the digging, it's the archaeological dig of the references. And that's happening in each one of these 3 panels. They're big Xerox copies, which again relates back to the punk house, flyering for shows. It's a Xerox copy, it's cheap, it's you can hand it out, you can throw it away, you can throw it away, it doesn't hurt your feelings. So these are giant Xerox copies that are sort of seeding us, seeding me, seeding my friends in a larger space and culture. And then the 3 panels that are over here are, they're huge screen prints also, and they're related to Google image search, which is something that you don't have control over. You can't mediate Google image search. It's based on an algorithm, and it gives you what it thinks you want based on what you're telling it. So I used the same search keys as I did in these: punk house, intentional community, grunge, alternative rock, acid house music, whatever. And I sort of started taking a tally of who comes up the most. And a lot of times it's really cliche, really obvious bands like the Sex Pistols, which are first wave punk, but they're all aesthetic, no content. You know, it's a really unfortunate thing. And then moving forward in time, going on to alt rock or garage rock, or just a jump in the future, you get a lot of images of the Smiths, which the Smiths are really cool, and they were also a lot more mainstream than anything that we were related to. Jumping forward again, it ended up being Nirvana, and jumping forward again, which is the real strange leap, is that Kesha became a really common image in a Google image search about alternative culture and alternative music, which I can agree with, and I totally am into, because to a lot of people in pop music, Kesha is alternative and she is the punk whatever. So I took those huge images, I picked really iconic images and I printed them really large, and I chose to then sort of tear them apart and dissect them and build them back up into these amalgamated icons of alternative culture. Something that is inauthentic, garbled, and representative of the relationship that people have to things based on the internet and Google and Wikipedia. So all of this work is pieces and parts of my MFA show, which was titled Fucking Super Bummer. And in the center here is the giant image of the house. So that's the monster house. That's my work. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer that. Talk about
I'm just curious if like people from affiliated with the Monster House had a response to your work, or because I have a couple friends that played there, and I'm curious like if you got feedback from anyone in that social circle.
Yeah, well, I sort of manipulated the situation a little bit with this project and having the invitation for people to present on their own. No, I didn't want to be judgmental from the onset. I let them describe themselves. So there was a little excitement going on about this project and where I was taking it. And there are people here from Monster House. I don't know. I don't think I've heard any feelings. I think they like it. There's a duality in all the work. You can either approach the photographs, the posters, the larger panels, and relate to it and have like some conversation within yourself about it, or you can walk up to it and reject it. So I'm presenting both sides of it in that it can be a positive thing or it can be a negative thing, and you can either love it or hate it. Either response is rational and authentic.
Yeah, I think that my response, well, I think that most of the projects here are fairly ambivalent, which is kind of nice. I don't think that you're taking too much of an ideological viewpoint on anything, even when we're looking at something that is just like pointing out the extremes of ideology that happen in communal spaces where everyone is brought together by having certain feelings about society and they push one another. So they care something about politics if they don't vote, or they think that hygiene is so unnecessary that they like don't ever use it again. All of which things I've like went through and felt like, and I think it's a fair representation that all these ideas were present, even if they're so hard to explicate at certain points. But seeing them all together is like a nice mosaic of what was going on. I think it's really interesting the Wikipedia articles, because most punks would have a problem with the idea of correct sourcing that Wikipedia relies upon.
Well, there's no system of checks in Wikipedia. It's based on input. So if someone inputs this band associated with this genre of music so many times, it gets included in the article. So it's all a fabrication. Wikipedia is it's reliable in its sort of manipulation of people's honesty, but you always find flaws in it. There's no one fact checking anything. It's all based on how many times did someone say this belongs here? Well, I think it belongs here. It's interesting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that like punks would think that the citing and sourcing on Wikipedia is authentic, but it's also the same way that the space was formulated.
Yeah, and you also give them a chance to represent their own selves.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
I wonder how you feel about yourself to this subculture now. Do you feel you're so integrated? Do you feel like an X? Do you feel like, you know what I mean, like what? Because a lot of this work is almost kind of like retrospective somehow, looking back at this time in your life.
Well, I have a lot of friends that are from that time period that I still see. I still go to shows. I don't think that being in a punk house or going to a show in a punk house or living up to these virtues matters to me anymore. But I think that it's fine if it does. So I think it's fun to go back. I don't know, it's fun to see people doing what I did and acting the way that I did a few years ago.
I've always thought it was interesting that a lot of artists that I know that didn't go through an academic route to becoming a well-known artist usually identify as having started in like a punk counterculture. I mean, if you trace so many people back, they'll be in a band or they'll be at a communal living space, and it all seems to inform their work going forward. In a sense, it's interesting that I think just that to focus on for your academic project for school.
Academic project for school, yeah. I don't really have anything to say about that, but yeah, I agree with you. A lot of people do have that background. A lot of creative people are involved in some sort of alternative culture at some point.
no one else has any other questions, then Michael Kellner is going to speak next.